Well, good morning, everyone. God has many attributes, and when we think of God, we think in terms of those attributes such as love, compassion, kindness, long-suffering, mercy, and even wrath, anger, power, harshness, and perhaps some others. In the Old Testament, God is characterized mostly in terms of wrath and anger and harshness and power. While in the New Testament, love, compassion, kindness, long-suffering, and mercy are the portrayed characteristics of God. And we are to become like God, taking on His attributes of love and compassion and kindness and long-suffering and mercy, and hopefully avoiding those other attributes that we don't have the ability to control, like hatred, anger, harshness, power. Generally, we just don't have the ability to control those things. The love and the compassion and the mercy and the tenderness and that sort of thing, they're not too hard to control. Most of us are contrary to those things anyway, being human beings with a jealous nature. And so to take on those things certainly won't hurt us any. We're to take them on. We want to have them. God wants us to have them. Well, mercy is one of the weightier matters of the law, it says in Matthew 23, verse 23. And I'll just break in and read that scripture. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of the law. That is, I added that, judgment, mercy, and faith. These ought you to have done, and not to leave the other undone. Well, one of the members here remarked after I gave my last sermon about some aspects of faith that I had covered now judgment and condemnation, and then I'd covered faith, and so I only lacked one to get the big three, I guess, of the weightier matters of the law. So today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about a couple aspects of mercy. Now, looking into it in the Scriptures is a fantastic study. There's a great deal to be said about mercy in God's Word. There's a great deal of understanding that we need to have with respect to mercy, and I'm certain that I'm lacking a great deal in understanding that. But it's very rewarding and very interesting to study into it. And I imagine of all the aspects or attributes of God's character, we probably come up lacking most in mercy than in any of the rest. Cervantes said, and I quote his words, among the attributes of God, although they are all equal, mercy shines with even more brilliance than justice. Now, why did Christ speak of mercy as a matter of the law? In Exodus 20, and verse 4 is where it's mentioned. It's in the second commandment. God talks about it right there in the second commandment. Beginning in verse 4 of Exodus 20, you shall not make unto you any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down yourself to them, nor serve them. For I, the eternal your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquities of the fathers upon the children, unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. And now notice this, and showing mercy unto thousands, or as it may well better be translated, unto the thousandth generation of them that love me and keep my commandments. So loving God and keeping His commandments is accompanied by mercy from God. Mercy. Mercy is a subject that is spoken of a great deal in the Scriptures, and it's certainly one of the most, strongest, I guess, one of the strongest attributes of God's character. Justice, Which would you rather have, mercy or justice? There's a hue and cry in the world today for justice on many, many scenes. But if we got justice, brethren, we'd be dead. I'd rather have mercy than justice. And God's mercy is really long-suffering. God's mercy is great. It's plenteous. There's more of it than we need, thankfully. In Psalms 86 and verse 5, David mentioned over and over and over in the Psalms about God's mercy. One whole psalm, every line has something to do with mercy. And we'll get into some of that later on. But in Psalms 86 and verse 5, for you, Lord, are good and ready to forgive, and plenteous in mercy unto all them that call upon you. Forgiveness and mercy and compassion and kindness are synonymous. They go hand in hand. You can hardly separate them. They mean about the same things. In Psalms 103, verse 8, another reference that David made to how great or how abundant is God's mercy. Psalm 103, verse 8, the Eternal is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and plenteous in mercy. He has plenty of mercy for us, and I'm thankful for that. Hopefully you are. Verse 11, he says some more, for as the heaven is high above the earth, so great is his mercy toward them that fear him. Verse 17, but the mercy of the Eternal is from everlasting to everlasting upon them that fear him, and his righteousness unto the children's children, to such as keep his covenant, and to those that remember his commandments to do them. So that kind of lets you know from the second commandment what he means by unto the 1,000th generation of them that love him. It's going to continue, thankfully. God's not going to stop being merciful. That's one of his attributes that, thankfully, he's not going to shut off like men can do. Men can have certain characteristics now, and then they can change them now and become something else. In a fit of rage or during hatred or something like that, they can be loving and kind and gentle on the one hand, and then forget all of those merciful things and become filled with hatred and violence and wrath. And men do some very, very wicked things. But God's mercy is going to be for everlasting to everlasting. It's never going to fail, thankfully. Because not all men today are experiencing God's mercy, nor throughout time. It's just not his plan, but they'll have a chance. Psalm 145, another place where David talks about how great God's mercy is. Psalm 145 and verse 8. The Eternal is gracious and full of compassion, slow to anger, and of great mercy. And there the two words compassion and mercy are used in the same verse, and they're almost equal. They almost are the same. They essentially mean the same thing. In Jeremiah 3 and verse 12, let's turn there. God says that he is merciful. Jeremiah 3 and verse 12. Go and proclaim these words toward the north, and say, return, you backsliding Israel, saith the Eternal, and I will not cause my anger to fall upon you, for I am merciful, saith the Eternal, and I will not keep anger forever. So one of the attributes of God is certainly anger and wrath. That's true. But I think overriding that attribute is mercy and compassion, because it's more spoken of, I think, in the Scriptures than we realize. So God has great mercy and compassion. He has plenteous mercy. He has mercy that's going to be everlasting. We don't have to worry about him turning it off and not extending it our way if we seek to obey him and keep his commandments, and we fear him and we seek him. He will extend to us his mercy. Well, have we learned what it means, I will have mercy? You know, Christ asked this lesson or spoke these words in some of his teachings in the New Testament. Well, before we get into some of those things where we can hopefully learn something about it, what is mercy? Webster's dictionary defines it as compassion or forbearance shown to an offender or subject, clemency, forgiveness. Mercy came into English by way of the French word merci, M-E-R-C-I, and has several closely related meanings, of which the most common is the power or disposition to forgive, especially forgiveness in excess of what might be expected. It is the attribute or the disposition to forgive. Certainly that characterizes God. Especially in excess of what might be expected. Now, when we offend, and many times we're sorry and sad that we have transgressed or made a mistake, and we would just like to be forgiven. But if you go above and beyond that, if you are the one offended in your forgiveness to the one that offends, then you're showing mercy. More than just forgiveness, it's over and above what might be expected. Isn't it nice to feel that you really are forgiven by someone that you transgress against if you ask their forgiveness? And they go out of their way to say, that's all right, or they do a little more than really what you expected. Doesn't it really feel good? Well, that's the way God is. He goes above and beyond that might be expected. And that's what mercy is. It's that disposition to forgive, but more than that, to forgive above and beyond that one might be expected to get. And that's what we get from God. And so synonymous with mercy are compassion and kindness, forgiveness. And Webster says that compassion is sympathetic consciousness of others' distress, together with a desire to alleviate it. Not only are we aware that other people have problems, or that they're suffering from some distress or difficulty or something that they can't overcome, but we would like to help alleviate that problem. We would like to do something to bail them out, to help them out some way or another. That's what compassion is. Empathetic response to another person. Putting yourself in their shoes, really understanding and comprehending what it is that they're suffering or going through. That's compassion. Wishing, or, when it's within your power, being able to alleviate that problem. Help them some way. So mercy and compassion and kindness go hand in hand. You can't separate one from the other when you're trying to consider mercy. They're so closely related that they almost mean the same thing, and they're used almost to mean the same thing in the Scriptures sometimes. Now, Christ came to perform mercy. That was one of the things that He came to do in Luke, the 1st chapter. If you recall, Zacharias was stricken dumb because he didn't believe what the angel told him. But when he did have that dumbness removed from him and he began to speak, Luke, the 1st chapter, beginning in verse 64, and his mouth was opened immediately. This is Zacharias, who was stricken dumb until, John was born. And his tongue loosed, and he spake and praised God. Now, this is verse 65 of Luke 1. And fear came on all that dwelt around about them. And all these sayings were noised abroad throughout all the hill country of Judea. And all they that heard them laid them up in their hearts, saying, What manner of child shall this be? And the hand of the Lord is with him. And his father Zacharias was filled with the Holy Spirit, and prophesied, saying, Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, for He has visited and redeemed His people. He has raised up an horn of salvation for us in the house of His servant David, as He spoke by the mouth of His holy prophets, which have been since the world began, that we should be saved from our enemies and from the hand of all that hate us. And now notice verse 72, to perform the mercy promised to our fathers, and to remember His holy covenant, the oath which He sware to our father Abraham, that He would grant unto us that we, being delivered out of the land of our enemies, might serve Him without fear. Notice now that this mercy is acquainted with being delivered out of the land of the enemies, in holiness and righteousness before Him all the days of our life. And so it was prophesied there by Zacharias, the father of John, who was stricken dumb for some time before the birth of John, and then began to speak after that event. It was prophesied that Christ would be that one who was going to come and perform the mercy promised by all the holy prophets long before His time. And we can go back to Micah, the 7th chapter, and see some of those things that this mercy was going to deliver the people from. Micah, the 7th chapter, beginning in verse 18. Israel sinned and Judah sinned, and they were taken into captivity. And they were going to have mercy extended to them sometime later. Notice verse 18. Who is a God like unto you, that pardons iniquity, and passes by the transgression of the remnant of His heritage? He retains not His anger forever, because He delights in mercy. No, He wasn't going to be mad, quote unquote, at Israel and Judah forever, because He delights in mercy. He will turn again. He will have compassion upon us. He will subdue our iniquities, and you will cast all their sins into the depth of the sea. You will perform the truth of Jacob and the mercy to Abraham, which you have sworn unto our fathers from the days of old. Notice, speaking of someone future, is going to perform the mercy spoken to Abraham in the days of old. And that's what Zechariah said Christ was going to do. Perform that mercy that was spoken of by the prophets of old. Here he says, you will perform the truth to Jacob and the mercy to Abraham, which you have sworn unto our fathers from the days of old. And in Jeremiah 46, beginning in verse 26, backing up to 25. The Eternal of hosts, the God of Israel, says, behold, I will punish the multitude of No, and Pharaoh, and Egypt with their gods and their kings, even Pharaoh and all them that trust in him. I will deliver them into the hand of those that seek their lives, and into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and into the hand of his servants. And afterwards it shall be inhabited, as in the days of old, saith the Eternal. But fear not you, O my servant Jacob, and be not dismayed, O Israel, for behold, I will save you from afar off, and your seed from the land of their captivity, and Jacob shall return, and be in rest and at ease, and none shall make him afraid. Fear you not, O Jacob, my servant, saith the Eternal, for I am with you. For I will make a full end of all the nations whither I have driven you, but I will not make a full end of you, but correct you in measure, yet will I not leave you wholly unpunished. And so there God is remembering the mercy that He had promised to them when He delivered them into captivity. And He said, I'm not going to let you stay there forever. And then it was referred to back in Micah that He was going to deliver them out of that. And one future was going to perform that mercy that it was going to take to get them away from their captors and deliver them out of that misery and agony and that captivity that they were subject to. Well, God wants us to learn to have mercy. Now, Christ taught some invaluable lessons for us to learn with regard to mercy so that we could kind of pick it up and understand what it's all about. Turn to Matthew, the 9th chapter. Here's one, a story that I've read several times, but I didn't equate it with a teaching with respect to mercy. Maybe it's not there. Hopefully you can see it. Beginning in the first chapter of Matthew 9. The first verse. And he entered into a ship and passed over and came into his own city. And behold, they brought to him a man sick of the palsy, lying on a bed. And Jesus, seeing their faith, said unto the sick of the palsy, Son, be of good cheer. Your sins be forgiven you. And behold, certain of the scribes said within themselves, This man blasphemes. So here's Christ extending to the people of the place or the area mercy, or his ministry, which included more than just mercy, and he's tagged a blasphemer. Those round about thought he was blaspheming because of the things he did, which were contrary to the established religious practices. Notice. And Jesus, knowing their thoughts, said, Wherefore think ye evil in your hearts? For whether is easier to say, Your sins be forgiven you, or to say, Arise and walk? But that you may know that the Son of Man has power on the earth to forgive sins, and I might add here, there's an interjection, and more than that. He has power to forgive sins, and more than that, and we'll see later. Then says he to the sick of the palsy, Arise, take up your bed, and go into your house. And he arose and departed to his house. But when the multitude saw it, they marveled and glorified God, which had given such power unto men. Now verse 9. And as Jesus passed forth from thence, he saw a man named Matthew, sitting at the receipt of custom. And he said unto him, Follow me. And he arose and followed him. And it came to pass, as Jesus sat at meat in the house, behold, many publicans and sinners came and sat down with him and his disciples. And now here it is. Some of his ministry is to hobnob with the sinners. You know, he didn't keep himself from the sinners. That's bad in the eyes of the local religious ethic. That's bad. Verse 11. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said unto his disciples, Why eat your master with publicans and sinners? The Pharisees asking now, why is this man, if he's God and they just saw his power where he healed that sick man, why is he hobnobbing with the sinners? Why is he associating with them? And notice what Christ's reply is. But when Jesus heard that, he said unto them, They that be whole need not a physician, but they that are sick. Verse 13. But go you and learn what that means. I will have mercy and not sacrifice. He told them to go and learn what that meant. I will have mercy and not sacrifice. A quote from their Old Testament scriptures. A quote from their law. I will have mercy and not sacrifice. And they didn't understand what it meant. He told them to go and learn about that. And what does that have to do with healing a man? And what does that have to do with sitting with sinners? And what does that have to do with other things that Christ did in his ministry? And you know, it was said that he would come and perform mercy. And it seems strange that Christ said those words, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, for I am not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. And so here's Christ right in the midst of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the religious Jews of the day, who had their law, who had their way, who had their demonstration of faith, their phylacteries, their things they did. And he comes in and he's sort of contrary to that. They had a show of religion. They had a carryover from the Old Testament, which was added to and expanded upon until, I guess in God's eyes, it hardly looked like the thing that he intended. It didn't look like the thing he intended. Not at all. And they had certain points of the law that they had to do, certain things they couldn't do, certain things that were becoming a burden to all the people. And Christ knew that. And he was come to show what mercy was, not sacrifice. They sacrificed their own selves, or they sacrificed other things so that they could keep their meticulous points of the law, contrary to what God intended for the law to be anyway. And they didn't understand what it meant. I will have mercy and not sacrifice. I don't want you doing all those things. I never intended for the Sabbath to be kept like you keep it, for example. You don't understand that sickness is a result of sin in most cases. That's what's implied here, because he healed a man by saying, your sins are forgiven. And that's mercy. You know, what did the definition say? In excess of what was expected. Not only was the guy healed and he carried off his bed, but he was forgiven of his sins. Yes, go and learn what that means. I will have mercy and not sacrifice. We need to learn that too, brethren. We need to learn what it means. I will have mercy. I will for you to be merciful. That's what God's saying. I want you to be merciful. I want you to understand what mercy is, live it and apply it. That's what I wanted, and that's what I intended from the beginning. You Pharisees need to go and learn about that. In Matthew 12, another example of the very same statement, where Christ referred to the very same statement in the Old Testament law of the Pharisees. Beginning in verse 1 again. This time it's a real specific example that we can put our teeth into. At that time, Jesus went on the Sabbath day through the corn, and his disciples were hungry, and he began to pluck ears of corn and to eat. Wow. That's just too much. The Sabbath day, picking corn in the field, working on the Sabbath. That's what he did. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said unto him, Behold, your disciples do that which is not lawful to do upon the Sabbath day. See, they had such rigorous, strict rules about how you conduct your life on a day that God made for man, that it was a burden to them. And Christ came to change that. He came to perform mercy and to let them know that he never intended for the Sabbath day to be that way. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't keep the Sabbath day holy, brethren. All I'm saying is that maybe in many cases we go overboard with respect to what we could or should do on the Sabbath day. If we understood what God meant, I will have mercy and not sacrifice. Notice what he says in verse 3. But he said unto them, now he's picking out an Old Testament example, a situation that happened that they were well aware of, to try to explain to them what it means to have mercy and not sacrifice. He said unto them, Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, and they that were with him, how he entered into the house of God and did eat the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, neither for them which were with him, but only for the priests? Don't you remember back there in Samuel where David was running from Saul, and he was hungry, and his men with him were hungry, and they wanted something to eat, and so they went into the temple, and they talked the priest into eating the showbread. And the showbread was supposed to be only for the priest to eat. You know, that was the law. Well, the Pharisees liked to latch on to things like that. That's what God had that law for. Strict, harsh, burdensome. To place a burden on the people, that was not God's intention. He said, didn't you remember that story? Verse 5, or have you not read in the law how that on the Sabbath days the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? Reading back through the Old Testament when it talks about the duties of the priest and what they had to do with respect to slaughtering the sacrifice and all that sort of thing, those guys were probably glad when the Sabbath was over. They worked harder on those days as far as physical labor did, or doing the work that was required of them as the priesthood, than they probably did on the other days of the week. Don't you remember, he said, how those priests in the temple did all that work and yet they're blameless? But I say unto you, and there's that legislative authority phrase again, I say unto you that in this place is one greater than the temple. Brethren, do you catch the significance of that? Here am I, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, God in the flesh. I'm greater than that temple, than that law of the shewbread, that law of the sacrifices, and all of that thing that was put on the people back in the Old Testament to remind them that there was a need for them to have a sacrifice. Don't you know that I'm greater than all that? I'm telling you that I'm greater than all of those things. All the stuff that David did, all the fear of breaking the law, all the things that the priests did in the temple. But if you had known what it means, he says, if you had only known what it means, I will have mercy and not sacrifice. The same exact reference to the Old Testament prophet. I will have mercy and not sacrifice. In context with David taking the shewbread, brethren, with the priests slaughtering sacrifices on the Sabbath, brethren, in that context, Christ said, I will have mercy and not sacrifice. If you just understood what that meant, if you could only learn what it means to have mercy and not sacrifice, as he said back in chapter 9, you would not have condemned the guiltless. He says, David wasn't guilty of any law-breaking to eat that showbread. That he was guiltless. He said the priests who do their work and their labor on the Sabbath are guiltless. They're not guilty. Yes, if you had only known what it means to have mercy and not sacrifice, that all those physical things which were, quote-unquote, a burden to you in the Old Testament dispensation were not ever intended by me in the first place. It's because of hard-hearted Israelites. It's because people didn't have God's Spirit and couldn't comprehend what the spiritual intent of God's law was, that he had to have physical things to keep them mindful of it. But they went overboard, the New Testament Pharisees and Sadducees, and added a lot more little things, like tearing off toilet paper and killing a fly, those sort of things. Added it to an unlawful thing to do on the Sabbath. And God never intended that. I would have mercy, he says, and not that kind of sacrifice. David was hungry. That was important. That was more important than the fact that the shewbread was only for the priest. And Christ said he was guiltless to take it and to eat it. Because Christ understood what it means to have mercy rather than sacrifice. And notice verse 8. For the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath day. You know, they took him to task about his disciples going through the corn himself and plucking ears of corn. That was the big thing. That was the question that they brought to him. Plucking corn, doing something unlawful in their eyes and in their minds, and in the law of the Sadducees and Pharisees of the day, doing something unlawful on the Sabbath. Christ said, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. And he said, one greater than the temple, and all of that is here now, and I'm telling you, you need to understand what it means to have mercy and not sacrifice. Yes, they had tied themselves up in such burdensome servitude to God that it was a pain to serve God. God doesn't want it that way. Never intended it to be that way. Well, we're all familiar with Mark 2, but let's go over there. That reinforces this one. Same story, but just a few different words that I would like to emphasize. Verse 23 in Mark 2, and it came to pass that he went through the cornfields on the Sabbath. Then his disciples began as they went to pluck the ears of corn. And the Pharisees said unto him, Behold, why do they on the Sabbath day that which is not lawful? Same story. And he said unto them, Have you never read what David did when he had need and was hungry, he and they that were with him? How he went into the house of God in the days of Abiathar the high priest, and did eat the showbread, which is not lawful to eat but for the priest, and gave also to them that were with him. He not only sinned, David, but he caused those that were with him to sin too, by eating that showbread which was not lawful for them to do. But he doesn't use the phrase here, have you not heard, or don't you understand what it means to have mercy and not sacrifice? He just says in verse 27, and he said unto them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. So he interjected just one other statement in here that wasn't in Matthew 12. He just said in Matthew 12, therefore the Lord is Lord of the Sabbath, which he says here. Therefore the Son of Man is Lord also of the Sabbath day. But the point is that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And if man were made for the Sabbath, then man would worry about tearing off toilet paper. Man would worry about swatting a fly. Man would worry about walking too far. Man would worry about doing this and that and the other thing on the Sabbath. If the Sabbath were the thing that man were made for. But it's not that way. Man, or the Sabbath, was made for man. It was made for man to refresh himself, to rejuvenate himself, to worship God in, to remind him that God is a creator, that there's a 6,000-year or 1,000-year plan of God, and that the Sabbath represents that 1,000 millennial reign. All those things are what the Sabbath is for, to refresh him from his mundane worldly activities, and not to tie him down so that probably after the Sabbath day, obeying it like the Pharisees and the Sadducees wanted the people to obey it, they were tired just from observing the Sabbath. I would be worrying whether, I was doing the right thing. You look around to see whether there's going to be something there to zap me because I tore off more toilet paper than I was supposed to, or something like that. That's the kind of burden it had become. And in the context of the way the Pharisees were interpreting God's way of life, Christ said, don't you understand what it means? I will have mercy and not sacrifice. Go and learn what it means. I will have mercy and not sacrifice. You don't comprehend it. I didn't intend for the Sabbath to be that way at all. God is not that kind of a God, where the Old Testament laws and the Old Testament rituals and things like that, which were given for a time until a schoolmaster would come, which were given for a time to remind the people of a need for this schoolmaster, had become such a burden to them. We'll see later on that God said He didn't even have sacrifices in mind when He gave him the people His law. It was an added thing because of the people, not because of God. No wonder the Old Testament is characterized by harshness, anger, wrath, power, those sort of things, more so than mercy. And mercy is certainly mentioned a great deal in the Old Testament. Don't misunderstand me. It's mentioned a great deal. It's extended to many people in the Old Testament. God was merciful. It's one of His characteristics and attributes, and He extended that mercy to many, many people. David in particular. Well, these lessons are invaluable for us to understand what God wants with respect to mercy, and so that we can comprehend what mercy is all about. One more in Luke 10. Familiar story. Maybe we haven't thought about it with respect to mercy. Or what mercy means. What it means, I will have mercy. God wants people to be merciful. God is merciful. He says, I will have mercy. I will have you to be merciful, is what that means. I want you to have a characteristic or an attitude of mercy about you. That's what I intended for people to have from the very beginning. I will have you to be merciful. But no, it's a whole lot easier for people to latch on to the physical things and so sacrifice. You know, even to this day, many Catholics do very severe penance in parts of the world, in Spain and in Mexico, crawling on their knees for miles, doing penance for trying to implore God to extend to them mercy. Isn't that ironic? It really is pathetic, brethren. That same sort of sacrifice that they're going through is the thing that God said, I didn't intend that. I want you to be merciful. And I'm not interested in sacrifice. It won't work. Luke 10, beginning in verse 23. Familiar story about the Samaritan. Just breaking in here. And He turned him unto His disciples and said privately, Blessed are the eyes which see the things that you see. For I tell you that many prophets and kings have desired to see those things which you see and have not seen them, and to hear those things which you hear and have not heard them. Brethren, we ought to rejoice in that. We're blessed too. We have God's Spirit, and we have been able to see and comprehend and understand things that people, even of this age today, don't see and comprehend and understand. And Christ says we're blessed for that. Now verse 25, And behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tempted Him, saying, Master, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? Now his whole purpose and his whole motive was to try to trip up Christ. He tempted Him, okay? He's just trying to trick Him. He's a smart lawyer. Maybe one of these Yankee lawyers, okay, that he's smart. He's been to school and he knows all the tricks and he knows all the loopholes. He's trying to trap Christ and trip Him up. What shall I do to inherit eternal life? Well, you know, probably me and my smart aleck reply would say, you ain't got a chance, fella. But that's not the way Christ was. He understood about mercy. He said unto him, What is written in the law? How do you read it? And he answered and said, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. See, he knew his books. He'd been through law school. He knew what the Word said, too. And Christ said unto him, You have answered right. See, he knew. He knew what it said. But he didn't comprehend what it said. You have answered right. This do, and you shall live. The promise of eternal life. If you can only do those things, fella. But he, willing to justify himself, still got that attitude, said unto Jesus, And who is my neighbor? You see, here's a smart lawyer looking for a loophole, looking for a way around it. He may have known full well who his neighbor was. But he was still looking for a loophole. And Jesus answering said, A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, which stripped him of his raiment and wounded him and departed, leaving him half dead. And by chance there came down a certain priest that way, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Yeah, okay, a religious leader. A man who didn't understand what God said, I would have mercy and not sacrifice. He went by on the other side. And likewise a Levite. He was at the place. When he was at the place, came and looked on him and passed by on the other side. Another one who didn't understand what it meant. I will have mercy and not sacrifice. And a certain Samaritan, someone who didn't understand religion, who was an outcast and an outsider, someone who they didn't even associate with, one of those sinners that Christ might have sat down with, someone who wasn't a religious person of the day, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him. There's that word. What was compassion? A sympathetic understanding of people's problems and a desire to alleviate them. Here's a man that walked by and he saw him there, and he really understood what the man was going through. He'd been beaten and robbed and bruised and left there for dead. Well, half dead. And he had compassion on him. A sympathetic or a conscious understanding of his problem and a desire to do something about it. Yes, that's what compassion means. And went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, and set him on his own beast and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And on the morrow when he departed, he took out 2 pence and gave them to the host and said unto him, Take care of him. And whatsoever you spend more, when I come again, I will repay you. Sounds like a good Christian act to me. Something that most of us, including myself, would not do, but would rather just go on the other side and ignore it. I'm speaking of myself, brethren. I would probably be like the priest and the Levite. And most of us in this room would. Because I think me, lack the meaning or the understanding of what it means to have mercy and not sacrifice. Yes, he left him there. He bound him up and he took care of him. He said, You take care of him, and if it costs you any more money than that I'm giving you now, I'll take care of it when I come back. I doubt that many of us would do that. Which now of these 3, he says to the smart-aleck lawyer, think you was neighbor unto him that fell among the thieves? And so Christ told him a story, this lawyer who tried to trip him up and trap him, but that he couldn't weasel out of. You know, the lawyer understood what neighbor meant. The lawyer understood what it was all about because he quoted him the law. Notice what he replied. And he said, this is the lawyer, he that showed mercy on him. Then said Jesus unto him, Go and do you likewise. End of story. He didn't preach to him any more than that. The man's conscience was condemned in himself. He that showed mercy on him. Why didn't they say compassion here? It said compassion up there when the Samaritan came by. They're very similar, brethren. The Samaritan showed compassion on him, and he showed mercy on him. The lawyer understood that act that Samaritan showed to that wounded, beaten man was a merciful act. That Samaritan understood what it meant to be merciful and not to worry about sacrifice. Now, whether he understood all about God, he had more understanding about that than the Levite and than the priest had. May not have been a true story. It was a story generated to make a point, though. A point about mercy. We need to learn to have mercy. That's what God said. You need to go and learn, he said to those Pharisees, what it means. I will have mercy and not sacrifice. You need to go and learn that, and I think we do too. I'll include myself. Maybe you don't. You know, in 1 Corinthians 9 and verse 9, I think it is, let me check. Paul was talking about, in general, about he ought to be eating from his work of the gospel, that sort of thing. In verse 9, Yeah, for it is written in the law of Moses, you shall not muzzle the mouth of the ox that treads out the corn. And then this statement by Paul. Does God take care for oxen? You know, back in Deuteronomy, I believe it is 25 verse 4. You can check that out later. It says, you shall not muzzle the mouth of the oxen that treads out the corn. Right in the middle of a lot of things that you're going to do and all these things in Deuteronomy 25. Does God care about oxen? What does Paul say? Or says he it altogether for our sakes? Is he concerned about oxen when he says don't muzzle the mouth of the oxen that treads out the corn? Or is he telling it for us? It's a principle, brethren. The lesson Paul was trying to get, or the thing Paul was trying to tell the Corinthians about is, you know, that's an example. Here's this oxen going around this treadmill grinding out this corn all day long, and if a little bit of corn falls on the ground and the oxen can bend down and eat it, don't you close the mouth of that oxen. I mean, he's earning his keep in one sense. That would be, you know, that wouldn't be merciful to muzzle that oxen's mouth when you've got him going around here treading out this corn and he reaches down every now and then and gets a mouthful of that corn. But he didn't say it for the oxen's sake. Paul said, he said it for our sake. It's a principle, brethren. That's how God looks at things, with a merciful eye, and not a sacrifice. It's a principle. Because God, what Paul is referring to here, is brought out in verse 14. Even so hath the Lord ordained that they which preach the gospel should live of the gospel. That's what he was saying. If I get a little livelihood from my work for God, then it's right. Because that unmuzzled ox got a little reward or wages for his work at treading out the corn. But he didn't say it for the oxen's sake. He's concerned about men. He's concerned about principles of mercy and compassion. It's one of the lessons we need to learn. Yes, time's full. Well, what does God want from us, brethren? Jeremiah 7, verse 22. Jeremiah 7, verse 22. And this is talking about sacrifices. He said, For I spoke not unto your fathers, nor commanded them in the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt, and gave them the law, as implied. That's the time when he really established the nation of Israel and gave them his law. That time they started learning about God's way. When I brought them out of the land of Egypt, concerning burnt offerings or sacrifices. But this thing commanded I them, saying, Obey my voice, and I will be your God, and you shall be my people. And walk you in all the ways that I have commanded you, that it may be well unto you. But they hearkened not, nor inclined their ear, but walked in the counsels and in the imagination of their own evil heart, and went backward and not forward. And so God added the sacrifices so that they could learn. Because a physical carnal people has to have physical carnal things to teach them. But he didn't have that in mind at all when he brought them out of the land of Egypt and gave them his law. But he knew what was going to happen. He knew that they were carnal and stiff-necked. And so he had to add the sacrifices. And in Hosea 6, verse 6, this is the quote that Christ quoted to those Pharisees. For I desired mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. But they, like men, have transgressed the covenant. There have they dealt treacherously against me. Yes, God said he desired mercy. He desired that his people, and that you and me, be merciful. That we understand what it means to act, to conduct ourselves with mercy, or with a merciful attitude. That's what he says. Micah 6, verse 6 and 8. Probably all familiar with that. But it's just one very short, concise statement about what God expects from us. Micah 6, verse 6. Wherewith shall I come before the Eternal, and bow myself before the high God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves of a year old? Will the Lord or the Eternal be pleased with thousands of rams, or with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul. All of these physical things. Is that what God wants? You know, even to sacrifice your beloved child to God, to try to get forgiveness of your sins, to try to make atonement with God or appease God, or to get God to extend to you forgiveness. Even offering my firstborn, he says, or 10,000 rams. Is that what God wants? Verse 8, He has showed you, O man, all of us, what is good, and what does the Lord or the Eternal require of you, but to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. It's a question. Hadn't He showed you, he says, that that's what He asks, that that's what He wants? He doesn't expect anything else from us, brethren. To love mercy, to do justly, and to walk humbly with God. Now that encompasses lots of little things. I'm not trying to say that that's simple, okay? But it's a general, concise statement there in just a few words of what God expects of us. And then the whole rest of this scripture is the ramification of that. But we need to learn what it means, I will have mercy and not sacrifice. We need to learn that. We don't know that naturally and normally. We don't know that when God impregnates us with His Holy Spirit. We have to learn that, brethren. We don't comprehend and understand mercy. Oh, we understand violence and hatred and contention and strife. Those are natural and normal things of the carnal human nature. We understand those things. We've got to get those things far from us. And we've got to comprehend and understand what it means to have mercy or to be merciful. Well, how do we obtain mercy? Matthew 5, Christ taught it. It's one of the cardinal principles in the Sermon on the Mount. It's pretty simple. Matthew 5 and verse 7. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. If you want to get mercy, brethren, be merciful. If you want to obtain mercy, be merciful. Hebrews 4 and verse 6. We're admonished by Christ how we can get mercy. Not 16. Got the wrong one there. Hebrews 4 verse 16. Let us therefore come boldly unto the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in the time of need. Mr. Armstrong says that this 4th chapter of Hebrews is the golden text chapter of the whole Bible, and it ends with that statement, let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy. That's how we get it. Go ask God for it, boldly. David did it many times in the Psalms. James 2, verse 13. The whole chapter of James 2 there is good. Those verses above there, beginning in verse 1, you ought to read those things. I don't have time to read all of that now, but just breaking into verse 13. For he shall have judgment without mercy that has showed no mercy. If you want to be condemned, and you don't want God to extend to you mercy, then don't show any mercy to others. If you want to have mercy extended to you, then you show mercy. And notice this last little phrase, and mercy rejoices against judgment. You know, I asked earlier, which would you rather have, mercy or justice? Which would you rather have, mercy or justice? Justice, it just means that the demands of the law are fulfilled. For example, it says, you shall not kill. What that really means is, if you kill, you will die. That's what that commandment says. God didn't put that penalty phrase on the end of all of those commandments, but that's what it's really saying. He said, thou shalt not kill, but what implies is, if you kill, you will die. Because the wages of sin is death, and sin is the transgression of the law, so we're going to die if we sin. And we break the law if we sin. So if you kill, or if you murder, you're going to die. The law demands death for someone who kills. That's justice. The law is satisfied. Mercy says, I'm going to forgive you for that and not cause you to die, or not make it that you have to die. That's mercy. I'd rather have mercy any day than justice. I believe even in this life and on this earth and in men's things, mercy is better than justice. So everybody cries for justice. What kind of justice should they mete out to this man who shot that police officer, this cab driver? Or the alleged accuser of the girl that was raped and killed in the Conroe school? Well, I don't know. I'm glad I'm not in any position to judge, condemn, nor extend mercy to those people. I'm not qualified for that yet. I'm glad I'm not in that situation or on that jury or have to make a choice or a decision. I'm not qualified to do that yet. One day, with God's help, and I make it into God's kingdom, then I'll have that ability. And I'll leave those things until then. And I'll start showing mercy when I'm able to in the situations that I'm confronted with, hopefully. That's what I desire to do. I hope you are too, because after studying into this, I can see that I need a great deal of it, brethren. God wants us to be of a merciful, contrite attitude and characteristic. He wants us to be that way. Not getting back, not seeking revenge. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I will repay. You don't have to repay. You just show some mercy. Proverbs 14, 21 and 22, another example of what we do, but if you change those things, how we can obtain mercy. Verse 21, Proverbs 14, he that despises his neighbor sins, but he that has mercy on the poor, happy is he. The implication here is that your neighbor is a poor person. And maybe so. Verse 20, or just above it, we might read that. The poor is hated even of his own neighbor, but the rich has many friends. And then verse 22, do they not err that devise evil? Yes, they do. That's the answer. But mercy and truth shall be with them that devise good. The implied answer to that first statement is they make a mistake that devise evil. Anyone who does that. But contrasted with that, mercy and truth shall be with them that do good or devise good. So if you're prone to think evil things or revengeful things against people that you come in contact with that do you wrong or fault you or that you have contention and strife with, the normal everyday situations in the world, brethren, that if you devise evil against them, you're not going to have mercy. You do err and you make a mistake. But if you devise good and you want no harm to them, except maybe mercy to be extended to them, then you'll have mercy and truth. And you'll devise good when you get that mercy and truth. George Eliot said, we hand folks over to God's mercy and show none ourselves. Oh yeah, we say that. May God have mercy on your soul. You know, they proclaim that loud and clear when somebody does wrong and he's going to be condemned or something. May God have mercy on your soul, but we don't show any mercy and compassion ourselves. Psalm 130 and verse 7. With God there's mercy, and we ought to be thankful and glad for that, brethren. With God there's mercy. Let's read the whole thing. Psalm 130. Out of the depths have I cried unto thee, O Eternal. Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to the voice of my supplications. If you, Eternal, should mark iniquities, O Lord, who shall stand? Not me. But there is forgiveness with you, that you may be feared. And forgiveness is one of those attributes of mercy. It's synonymous with mercy. I wait for the Eternal, my soul does wait, and in His word do I hope. My soul waits for the Lord more than they that watch for the morning. I say more than they that watch for the morning. Let Israel hope in the Eternal, for with the Eternal there is mercy, and with Him is plenteous redemption. And He shall redeem Israel from all his iniquities. With God there's mercy. We ought to be thankful for that, brethren. If we had to be dealt with by men, we might not obtain mercy. How would you like to be in the hands of the Ayatollah Khomeini? Or some of those other people, not just him, who are over there in those backward countries, who don't understand anything about love and compassion, who have very little regard for human life at all. Their brand of mercy or justice is a great deal different than ours, and I might add, of God's. I'm glad I don't have to be in their hands. Paul obtained mercy, and he had done many, serious things, serious faults of sins, of what he called wasting the church before he was converted, before God struck him down. But he obtained mercy, and he said, because I was ignorant of the things I've done. Yeah, well, you can even obtain mercy when you're not ignorant of the things you've done, and you're just weak, and you give in to those things that you don't want to do, but you do them anyway because you're weak, and you're not ignorant of them. But God is merciful to forgive upon repentance. About going to that throne of grace and obtaining mercy, God will forgive. David, after he had committed his great transgression with Bathsheba, cried out to God for mercy. Psalm 51:1. David had a great deal to say about mercy in the Psalms. But Psalm 51 is that psalm of repentance after that great sin. He said, "Have mercy upon me, O God, according to your loving kindness. According unto the multitude of your tender mercies, blot out my transgressions." He cried out for mercy from God. Now, if he'd have gotten justice, he'd have been zapped. That's what the law demands. But he got mercy. He appealed to God in many other places in the Psalms. And I'm not going to read these for lack of time. Psalm 41, verse 4, verse 10, Psalm 56, verse 1, Psalm 57, verse 1, many others. The fact that we have to learn mercy, brethren, implies that we don't know about it automatically. And we need to go and learn that. Now, God's mercy endures forever. Many Psalms say that. And there are scriptures in the New Testament, like Romans 9, where God's mercy is not going or being extended to all men today. Some people He blinds for a time. Others He shows mercy to, you and me. We have mercy extended to us today, and we've been given a call to do a work and to grow and develop and overcome and qualify to be given sonship in His family. We have that mercy now. Others don't have that. But Psalm 136 is the one where every verse, we'll not read it all, but you might glance through that. "Oh, give thanks unto the Eternal, for He is good, for His mercy endures forever." Every verse in that psalm has His mercy endures forever. I guess David was glad for that fact. He appreciated that fact. He understood what it meant to be in the merciful hands of God rather than to seek justice. Famous American philosopher said, quote, "Three things in human life are important. The first is to be kind. The second is to be kind. The third is to be kind." Kindness and mercy are synonymous, brethren. Yes, they're pretty important. If we could have that attribute of God called mercy, if we could just acquire it, if we could really learn what Christ meant, "I will have mercy and not sacrifice," then our dealings with other people would be much more harmonious, much more pleasant, much more joyous. It's something that we can do, though. We can work at it. We can just ask God for the help and the power of His Holy Spirit to, mend our minds so that we're merciful, regardless of what someone does to us. Do we want to get back? Do we want to have revenge, something that God retains to Himself? Or do we want to extend mercy? Now, the world has a different set of values with respect to that. It's just not fair. You feel like you've been taken advantage of. It's pressed upon us by the way men live and the way acts are taken care of in this world today that we've got to get back. Or he owes me that, or I've got to be righted for the wrong that's been done to me. That's contrary to what God taught. It's contrary to understanding what it means, "I will have mercy." I will have you to be merciful, is what God's saying. I want you to be of a merciful type nature. I want you to extend to others mercy. I want you to be empathetic about other people's needs and try to help them, around them, take care of them. Alexander Pope, a famous British author, wrote this little poem. It says, "Teach me to feel another's woe, to hide the fault I see. That mercy I others show, that mercy show to me." Yes, if we want to have mercy from others and from God, we've got to extend mercy ourselves. We've got to show it forth to others if we expect to get it in return. Turn to Titus 3. The same mercy that we show to others, we can expect back. God saved us, or is saving us, because of His mercy. Because of His mercy. Verse 1, Titus 3, "Put them in mind to be subject to principalities and powers, to obey magistrates, to be ready to every good work, to speak evil of no man, to be no brawlers, but gentle, showing all meekness unto all men. For we ourselves also were sometimes foolish, disobedient, deceived, serving divers lusts and pleasures, living in malice and envy, hateful and hating one another. But after that the kindness and love of God our Savior toward man appeared, after we were called, after we got a little taste of God's Holy Spirit, a begettal," verse 5, "not by works of righteousness which we have done, but according to His mercy, He saved us by the washing of regeneration and renewing of the Holy Spirit." We're being saved by God's mercy. We should covet that attribute of God, to be merciful. Mercy implies compassion that forbears punishing, even when justice demands it. You comprehend what that means, brethren? Mercy implies compassion that forbears punishing, even when justice demands it. Justice says, kill that man because he broke the law, and the law needs to be satisfied. Mercy says, forgive him. Now that's all based on true repentance, brethren, and a right spirit and attitude with us, and may not apply in every situation in man's world and society. But we're to have that attribute of mercy in ourselves, and we're to extend it and practice it and show it forth to the world and to our brothers and to others. We need to cry out like the man in Luke 18:13, "God, be merciful to me, a sinner."
Additional programs and literature available at hwalibrary.com.